My name is Catherine Mitchell. That day, I walked into the boardroom as the person who had led the company for over a decade, turning it from a sinking operation into one of the leading maritime logistics firms in America. But right there, in front of me and the entire board of directors, my father, the man I once trusted completely, smiled and announced, "The new CEO will be Brandon, my son." I stood there. No one looked at me. Not a single explanation. I had poured my youth into keeping that empire from collapsing, while he quietly erased my name from the will, and from the family. Have you ever been betrayed by the person you loved most? If you've ever felt overlooked despite giving everything you had, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to hear what happens next, because this story is just beginning. I was born in Charleston, a small port city on the South Carolina coast, where the sea breeze never stops blowing and the scent of salt lingers in every memory of my childhood. My mother passed away when I was just 8. From that moment on, my world became nothing but my father and his endless trips between docks, working day and night to keep the company from going under. Back then, Mitchell Maritime was barely a name in the shipping world. Just a handful of aging vessels, a few small contracts, and a rented office in an old industrial zone by the river. No one thought that company would last another year. But my father clung to it like it was the last piece of a dream he refused to let go of. I remember the nights he picked me up late after his shift, the smell of engine oil still clinging to his shirt. We'd eat canned noodles by the docks, sitting on a freezing steel container, while he pointed at the ships and explained ocean currents, fuel costs, how to schedule cargo routes. I didn't understand it all, but I remembered his face. That was the only time I ever truly saw him alive. I grew up among shipping containers, foghorns, and spreadsheets. When you lose your mother too young and your father only knows how to live for his work, you learn to be quiet, to observe, and to find your own way. I studied hard, earned a full scholarship to a prestigious business school in New York. When I graduated, 3 major corporations offered me jobs, 6-figure salaries, glass offices, careers already mapped out. But instead of staying in Manhattan, I returned to Charleston. By then, Mitchell Maritime was drowning in debt. One of our biggest clients had just gone bankrupt, triggering a chain of missed payments. 3 of our main vessels were docked with no cargo to carry. The bank started calling. My father had lost weight. He locked himself in his office and stopped talking to anyone. The first day I walked into his office, I had a cup of coffee in one hand and a 5-line recovery plan in the other. He looked at me for a long time, then shook his head. "Catherine, this isn't your place. You're smart. You should be somewhere else." I placed the cup on his desk, looked him in the eye, and said, "I didn't come back to be an accountant or a deputy. I came to save your company. If you won't let me do that, then let it fail." I didn't wait for his response. I started working that very day. I didn't need a title. I needed authority. And I earned it from the ground up. I made calls to every client, asking for payment extensions. I flew to Houston, then to Savannah, meeting with customers to renegotiate contracts. I cut unnecessary costs, reworked fuel deals, sold off 2 older ships just to keep us operational. I convinced a then-emerging e-commerce company, now a multi-billion-dollar corporation, to sign a 3-year exclusive shipping deal with Mitchell Maritime. Then came 2008. The financial crisis dragged the entire shipping industry to its knees. Dozens of companies folded. Routes were cut. I nearly lost 2 major contracts when the banks froze lending. I stayed up 3 nights in a row rebuilding our entire financial strategy, preparing new loan proposals, then flew to New York to pitch a private investment fund face-to-face. When I returned, my father was waiting for me at the docks, the ocean wind blowing so hard his hair whipped across his forehead. He said nothing, just handed me a coat. "You saved it," he murmured as I stepped out of the car. I didn't look at him. I just gripped the coat tightly in my hands. And Brandon? He was in Paris that entire time. After completing a 6-month fashion design course, he spent my father's monthly allowances chasing a knitwear brand that failed. Then he tried opening a restaurant. That failed too. After that, he dabbled in brand consulting. No results. I never blamed Brandon. We were different people. He had no connection to the company, no nights passed out at a desk with the hum of engines outside. He wasn't the one standing at the docks at 4 in the morning counting freight as it arrived just in time. But my father, he was different. He always said, A son is the heir. I didn't argue. I just worked. I let the results speak for me. And those results were a stable, nationally recognized Mitchell Maritime, valued at over $70 million. A company I rebuilt from the wreckage my father left behind. And yet, a single sentence erased it all. Brandon will be the CEO. As if everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, every sleepless night was just a footnote. A chapter no one wanted to read. I thought I didn't need a title. I thought I didn't care about recognition. But in that moment, for the first time in my life, I realized I wanted to be seen. To have my name written into what I had built with blood and resolve. But I didn't cry. I didn't walk away. I sat down, reopened the company files, and started preparing for a battle they didn't even know they were about to lose. I left that boardroom with a chill crawling down my spine, like someone had slammed a door I didn't know I was standing outside of. Brandon smiled, shook hands with the board members, while I quietly disappeared from the frame of my own life, like a temp whose contract had just ended. That night I didn't go home. I drove straight to my father's private attorney's office. Walter Green, the same man who had handled our family's affairs since the company was no more than a single-page license pinned to our kitchen wall. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give them time to prepare anything. When I walked in, the secretary recognized me immediately. She hesitated, then led me into his office. Green sat by a tall window, wearing reading glasses and holding a thick folder in one hand, a cup of tea in the other. "Catherine," he said, slightly surprised. "Your father didn't mention you were coming." "Because I'm not here as his daughter," I replied calmly. "I'm here as the person who has run Mitchell Maritime for 15 years. And I have a few questions about the legality of this new appointment." He set his cup down, removed his glasses, and exhaled. "Please have a seat." I took the chair opposite him, sitting up straight with my hands clasped. "I want to know," I said, "based on company legal records and inheritance documents, who has been designated as the rightful successor?" He didn't answer immediately. He opened a drawer, pulled out an old leather file, flipped through a few pages, and paused on a notarized document. "I need absolute honesty, Walter," I said. My voice was steady. "I gave my youth to this company. I'm not leaving here without the full truth." He looked at me like a man who had just realized he could no longer pretend neutrality. "The current will," he said slowly, "was redrafted 5 years ago, while Brandon was still in France. In it, Richard Mitchell names Brandon as the sole heir to the entire estate, including majority shares in Mitchell Maritime." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not to compose myself, but to try and believe I had heard him wrong. "My name's not in it?" I asked, each word falling from my lips like a stone. "No," he replied softly. "It never was." I stared at him, at every wrinkle in a face that had once been familiar, now suddenly so distant and cruel. "You know I'm the only one who's run this company. You know I'm the reason Mitchell Maritime still exists." "I do, Mr. Green nodded. "And this isn't easy for me to say. But that will." Richard asked that it remain confidential. "He didn't want you to know." I shot up from my chair, feeling the air in the room vanish in an instant. "Why? Why would he do that?" He said. "Brandon was the rightful heir," he hesitated. "That the company, after all, still carries the Mitchell name, and should be passed down to a man in the family." A deep anger rose inside me, but I didn't yell. I didn't cry. What came instead was an icy emptiness. "Then what am I?" I asked softly. "A placeholder? A glorified employee? Just the convenient shadow to keep things intact until Brandon came back?" Green didn't answer. He lowered his head. And in that silence I got the only answer I needed. I walked out of his office without another word. Outside, the sky had turned a dull slate gray. A strong wind was blowing in from the port. I stood there in the empty parking lot, staring at the quiet freighters resting along the riverbank. I had believed I was building a legacy. Turns out I was just a laborer quietly constructing a throne for someone else to sit on. And I started to wonder, was this really a sudden decision like he claimed? Or had this been planned years ago, while Brandon was still living off allowance abroad? A plan in which I, the quiet, determined daughter, was never meant to have a place? I got back in the car, sat in the driver's seat, but didn't turn the engine on. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through all the internal files I'd built over the years. Contracts, meeting notes, stock records, financial memos. If they had already prepared everything to cut me out of this game, they must have forgotten one thing. I'm the only one who knows exactly how the whole machine runs. And if this is the game they want to play, then I'll be the one flipping the board. I started noticing the odd looks in the office hallways. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked past. Senior executives who suddenly replied to me in clipped, cold phrases. Some avoided my eyes altogether. Others gave me awkward smiles before quickly turning away in meetings. No one said anything directly, but I could feel it. Something was shifting beneath the surface. I wasn't a stranger to suspicion. In logistics, women are as rare as ships arriving on time during hurricane season. I had walked through stairs of doubt before. I had worked twice as hard just to earn trust. But it was different. This wasn't doubt from the outside. This was betrayal from the very people who had weathered storms with me. One late evening while I was reviewing a contract with a new client, my phone buzzed. A message from Maria, my executive assistant for the past 7 years. Just one sentence. You need to hear this. I sat still in the quiet office, put on my headphones and hit play. The first sound was the clinking of glasses. Probably a meeting in a bar or private dining room. Then Brandon's voice came in, clear, disturbingly confident. Don't worry, once I'm in the CEO's seat, the preferred shares will be distributed as promised. Anyone backing me now, I won't forget. Another male voice responded, likely one of the longtime shareholders. And Catherine? She's not going to give it up easily. Brandon laughed. She's just a temporary solution. My father always said so. Once I come back, she'll step aside. She's good, I'll admit, but she's not the real successor. I leaned back in my chair, unsure if I was furious or just hollow. The recording continued. Then came my father's voice, low, firm, the same voice I had heard 100 times at board meetings. But it wasn't meant for me. She's talented, yes. But she's a woman. He can't carry this forever. When she's young, she has drive, energy. But family, emotions, marriage, sooner or later those things get in the way. I closed my eyes. It felt like someone had pressed my heart flat against a cold steel table. Every word from the man who once held my hand along the docks when I was 9, now a quiet verdict. Not because I failed, but because I wasn't his son. I listened to the recording again. This time with ears no longer naive. My father and Brandon had planned this long ago. They weren't waiting to see if I could succeed. They were waiting for the right time to erase me. I was the placeholder, the emergency backup while Brandon failed his way across Europe. They let me carry the weight, shoulder the risk, give up sleep, health, and personal life, just so the son could come back to a throne that I had kept warm for him. I couldn't even remember the last time my father looked at me as a true successor. Maybe he never had. I saved the recording. Then I called Maria. She answered, her voice uneasy. You heard it. I did, I replied softly. Thank you for sending it. What are you going to do? I was quiet for a moment. My mind wasn't spinning anymore. Everything was becoming clearer, like the sea after a heavy gust. Nothing yet, I said. They think they're a few steps ahead of me. Let them think that. I hung up, walked to the large glass window and looked out at the port. Below, the cranes cast long lights over red, yellow, and green shipping containers. Each one a marker of work, of rhythm, of a life I had given myself to. I knew which shipment was headed where, which contracts expired in which month, which team leaders were managing which zones. I hadn't just run this company, I had lived it. And now, while they whispered deals in the dark, I knew I had to prepare the light. Because once the truth was laid bare, no one would be able to turn away and pretend they hadn't seen. I returned to my desk, turned on my computer, and began combing through every stock record and transfer agreement signed over the past decade. I wanted to know every clause, every promise, every signature. If they were going to play this game behind my back, then I would play it too, but not with emotion. With legal precision. Not to reclaim recognition. But to prove I was never the temporary solution. I was the one who built the empire they were trying to steal. And I wasn't going to let them. I started by hiring my own attorney. Not someone from inside the company, not someone with any ties to my father or Brandon. I needed someone with no debts to repay and no fake loyalty. That person was Elaine Foster. a former financial prosecutor from San Diego who now ran her own firm specializing in corporate internal disputes. We met for the first time at a small cafe north of the city. She didn't talk much. Just took notes while I laid out everything. The missing will, the surprise board meeting, Brandon's backdoor shareholder deals, and the recording I had in hand. When I finished, she asked just one question. Can you grant me access to all shareholder documents going back to 2008? I nodded without hesitation. Within 2 weeks, Ms. Foster and her team began tearing through layers of documents. Old files thought forgotten were digitized again. Every shareholder contract, every transfer note, every silent buyout clause. I stayed late at the office every night receiving progress summaries from her. Each email from her team brought me one step closer to the truth, and to reclaiming what was mine. One night, just before 10 p.m., Foster called me. We just found an important document, she said. A shareholder agreement from 2011 signed by Mr. Richard Mitchell and you, fully notarized. I shot up from my chair. You mean the capital investment contract? Yes. The agreement states that during the financial crisis of 2011, Mr. Mitchell accepted a personal investment from you, $3 million pulled from your private investment fund, to keep the company's cash flow running. In return, you received 35% temporary voting rights within the board of directors, valid until the investment was fully repaid or revoked in writing. I closed my eyes. The memory of 14 years ago came flooding back. I had sold my first apartment in Manhattan and drained my savings to fund Mitchell Maritime, after banks refused to extend credit due to bankruptcy risks. I still remembered the look in my father's eyes as he took the check from my hand. He didn't thank me. He simply said, "I'll repay it soon." But since then, not a single dollar had come back. And no written cancellation had ever been signed. If this document is still valid, I said, then I have the right to vote on any executive decision made by the company. Not just that, Ms. Foster replied. Combined with the direct shares you currently hold, nearly 18%, and the ones you've quietly been buying, if you reach 51%, you don't just have veto power, you can restructure the leadership entirely. I sat still for a few seconds, then asked, does anyone else know about this 2011 agreement? No one but us and the notary office where the original copy is stored. But I suggest you move quickly. If they find out you have this card in hand, they'll try to dispute its validity or stir up confusion. I hung up and early the next morning began reaching out to smaller shareholders I knew were unhappy with Brandon. Some had worked with me since the days when the company only had 2 ships. They were the ones who truly understood what I had done, what I had sacrificed to pull the company through its worst moments. They didn't need much convincing. I met with them one by one, at hotel breakfasts, on golf courses, in quiet cafes. I didn't beg. I didn't make lofty promises. I simply presented numbers, growth charts, and the development plans I had once pitched to the board but were rejected for being too ambitious. I painted them a clear picture of what the company would look like under Brandon, lacking experience, vision, and grit. And finally, I offered to buy their shares at 15% above market value, with a signed confidentiality clause. In just 3 weeks, I bought nearly 14% of the company's shares from scattered investors. Combined with my existing shares, I reached 32%. Add the 35% voting rights from the 2011 agreement, and I now held over 50% control. I didn't make an announcement. Not a single press release. Brandon and my father still believed I was backing down. But in truth, I was already one move ahead. And I knew, long-term power isn't secured through blood or promises. It's sealed with a legal signature, on contracts they thought didn't matter. I scheduled the board meeting for Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. in the executive conference room on the 16th floor, the very room where every major strategy meeting had been held for the past 2 decades. I asked the secretary to send out an urgent notice to all board members, along with a short note. I will present a plan for executive restructuring. Attendance is mandatory. No one knew what I would say, but they knew I was preparing something. And my silence over the past few weeks had left them uneasy. When I entered the room, Brandon was already there, sitting directly across from the head chair. Navy suit, silk tie, hair meticulously styled, probably by some personal groomer. My father sat to his left, leaning back in his chair, hands clasped as if watching a private trial. The rest of the board had settled in, eyes shifting toward me with a mix of anticipation, concern, and more than a little suspicion. I sat down, placed my laptop on the table, opened a hard copy binder, and looked around the room, slowly, deliberately. "I won't take much of your time," I began. "I just want to share a few numbers." The screen behind me lit up. Financial figures, growth charts, revenue trend lines, gross margins, renewal rates from the past 5 years. Each slide was a cut of the truth. "Under my leadership," I said clearly, "Mitchell Maritime's revenue increased by 280% over 7 years, from $28 million to over $75 million. We've expanded into 4 new states, secured 3 strategic transport contracts, and reduced operational costs by 18%. No one disagreed. Paul, the CFO, nodded slightly. He had once strongly opposed my restructuring in the early days, but eventually stood by me through our toughest chapters. I changed slides. A short list appeared on the screen. Decisions made by Brandon Mitchell over the past 8 months. 3 failed partnerships. 1 canceled contract due to poor negotiation. 2 senior executives resigned over direction conflicts. I turned to Brandon. "Would you like to explain to the board why, in less than a year, we lost nearly 8% market share in the Eastern region?" Brandon smirked. "Are you trying to embarrass me? Everyone knows the Eastern market is down across the board." "It's not down across the board," I replied. "Only for companies that can't retain clients." The room went quiet. A few board members glanced at Brandon, visibly uneasy. I took a deep breath, then reached into my folder and pulled out a leather-bound file. "And now for the most important part." I held up the document. Voting Rights Transfer Agreement, dated June 14, 2011, signed by Mr. Richard Mitchell and myself. Notarized and never revoked. I passed out copies to each board member. Several leaned in immediately to read. My father didn't move. Brandon leaned forward slightly, took his copy. "In 2011, I continued, I personally invested $3 million into Mitchell Maritime when the company was on the brink of collapse. In return, I was granted 35% internal voting rights, with the condition that unless revoked in writing, the agreement remains in effect." I paused and tapped a key on my laptop. A breakdown of current shareholdings appeared on the screen. As of today, I directly own 17.8% of shares. In the past 3 weeks, I've acquired another 14% from dissatisfied shareholders. I looked directly at my father as I spoke the final line. With the addition of the 35% voting rights, I currently control 52.8% of the executive authority at Mitchell Maritime. I have full legal power to propose or veto any senior leadership appointments. Brandon suddenly jumped up, slamming his hand on the table. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, his face flushed red. "This is fraud. You can't do this behind my back." I didn't flinch. "I didn't do anything behind your back. I used what I built. And if you want to challenge it legally, Brandon, we can take it to court." My father still said nothing. His jaw tightened, his hands gripping the armrest. I looked him in the eyes. There was no confidence. Only confusion. The look of a man realizing just how badly he had miscalculated. Brandon glanced around the room, hoping someone would speak up for him. No one moved. Finally, he shouted, "I'm not staying in this pathetic circus." He ripped off his tie, threw it on his chair, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him like a punctuation mark of fury. The room fell into silence. I remained seated, opening the first page of the restructuring plan I had spent the last 3 months preparing, my voice calm and firm. "Now then, let's begin discussing how to lead Mitchell Maritime into a new era." The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The sky was still pale with mist, the city not yet fully awake, but Mitchell Maritime was already humming with quiet unrest. As I passed through the lobby, 2 employees were watching something on a phone screen, quickly hiding it when they saw me. I didn't need to ask. I already knew what had happened. Minutes later, I got a message from Maria. "It's out. You should see it." I sat at my desk and opened my email. Dozens of subject lines flooded my inbox. Catherine Mitchell, cold-hearted to ousts legal heir? Power struggle at Mitchell Maritime sparks controversy. Family legacy shattered by silent coup. Every article struck the same tone. I was the manipulator. I was the traitorous daughter. I had pushed out my younger brother to steal the seat of power. One front-page piece in a prominent financial paper claimed, Brandon Mitchell, the designated heir, was forced out of the company by his sister before he could even implement his development plan. I leaned back in my chair, calmly reading each line. They portrayed me as a cold, calculating operator. Words like ambitious, absolute control, undermining the family were skillfully scattered throughout. No one mentioned the growth metrics. No one brought up the decisions that pulled the company from collapse. And certainly, no one questioned Brandon's actual role in any of it. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen plenty of media attacks before. But this one was aimed at me, and it came from my father's side. Just hours later, I received a copy of a press release from the PR team. Mitchell Maritime confirms that a leadership change has occurred. While we regret the internal tensions, we remain committed to our family legacy and the vision of our founders. Not a single word mentioned me. No acknowledgement of my 15 years of service. Instead, every phrase was carefully crafted to plant the idea that I had disrupted the family's harmony. I stood up, left my office, walked into my private suite, locked the door, and made a phone call. "You still have everything I sent you?" I asked. "All of it," the man replied. "It's edited and encrypted. Just waiting on your word." "I'm giving it," I said. "Right now." That man was Michael Burns, a veteran investigative journalist, once a leading financial correspondent in New York, now running a publication focused on deep business reporting. He owed me a personal debt, and I came to collect. An hour later, Michael published the first piece. Who really steered Mitchell Maritime through two major crises? The article wasn't a defense. It was a meticulously documented, neutral, but sharp record. He analyzed financials from 2008 to 2023, compared leadership eras, cited meeting minutes, signed contracts, and restructuring initiatives I had both proposed and executed. Most importantly, he published the evidence I had provided. Internal emails from 2015 showing my father authorizing me to sign long-term contracts, financial memos verifying my personal investment, and a performance comparison between Brandon and me. On one side, dozens of growth indicators. On the other, failed ventures and losses. The article closed with a short, weighty sentence. If Catherine Mitchell wasn't the one steering the ship, then who has been holding the wheel for the past 15 years? Within 48 hours, major news outlets picked it up. The narrative began to shift. Initial headlines were slowly replaced with more thoughtful analysis. Inheritance feud or the rise of a rightful female leader? Legacy isn't given, it's earned. I received emails from several board members. Some offered apologies for not knowing the full picture. One simply wrote, "Thank you for not backing down." That night, alone in my office, I replayed the old recording, my father's voice echoing in my ears. "She's a woman. She can't carry it forever." I didn't skip that part. I let it play. Then I shut it off, opened the window, and took a deep breath. The sea breeze swept in, carrying the scent of salt and old fuel. I looked out at the docks, where it had all begun, and understood I had just stepped into new waters. But I wasn't just the operator. I was the one who now got to name the direction of the ship. And they could no longer write me out of the story. The restaurant he chose was an old place by the port, the same one we used to visit whenever the company reached a milestone. I remembered dinner in 2011 when I landed our first deal worth over $10 million. He ordered lamb chops and 2 glasses of red wine. That night, he toasted with me, his eyes showing a trace of pride but still guarded, like he didn't want to give too much away to the daughter he always saw as temporary. Tonight, I walked into that restaurant with a different energy. I wasn't there seeking recognition. I no longer needed anyone to prove my worth. But I came because if he had something to say, I was willing to listen. He was already seated. Simple white shirt, silver hair combed neatly as always. There was an open bottle of wine and 2 empty glasses on the table. I pulled out my chair and sat down without saying a word. "Thank you for coming," he spoke first. "I wasn't sure you'd be willing to hear me out." "I came," I replied quietly. "Not to listen, but to look you in the eye while it's being said." He nodded, unmoved by the formality in my tone. This wasn't anger anymore. It was just truth. "You did well," he said, staring down at his hands. "Better than I ever imagined. And yet you still chose Brandon. This time he didn't nod. Didn't shake his head. Just exhaled slowly, as if that sentence had haunted him for years, but never enough to make him act differently. Brandon is my blood, he said carefully. And I made a promise to his mother long ago, that I'd give him a place in the company. I didn't want to break that. I laughed, not because the story was touching but because it was so brutally hollow. And what about me? Am I not your blood too? Do I not deserve a promise? I looked at him, not raising my voice, not pleading. Just asking the question I had asked myself for years. You're the strongest child I have, he said. You didn't need anyone's help. I thought you'd understand. I did understand, I said slowly. I understood that in your eyes, my strength was the excuse you used to forget your responsibility. That because I didn't ask, you thought you didn't need to give. He looked at me, something soft sinking into his expression. Something close to regret but not quite honest enough to call remorse. I didn't come here to justify anything, he said. I came with a proposal. Brandon went too far. But you and your family. We can't turn our backs on each other forever. I want the two of you to run the company together. To lead it side by side. I want to preserve something of this family. I sat still. The wine glass was still empty. Soft jazz played from a corner of the room, like a soundtrack to a slow-moving tragedy. I looked at him for a long time. Not to consider, but to see if there was any trace left of the man who once held my hand on a stormy night out on deck, teaching me how to spot navigation lights in the fog. I'm not refusing because I don't want to share, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm refusing because I no longer have faith. And if you understood what kind of faith I built this company with, you'd understand that what I'm saying can't be undone. He didn't respond. He just sat there staring past my shoulder, out through the window toward the harbor where the ship lights flickered in the distance. I realized then this wasn't the man I used to chase for approval. This was an old man, who had missed too many chances to love the right way. Finally he stood up. Slowly pushed his chair back, movements deliberate but firm. He didn't say another word. Didn't look back. Just walked past me and out the door. The door clicked softly shut behind him, silent, but loud enough to echo the emptiness settling in my chest. I stayed seated. The wine glass remained untouched. The appetizer hadn't even been ordered. But I wasn't hungry. Only a long silence lingered, like the end of a chapter one hadn't written, but was forced to live through. I looked around the restaurant. Every table, every chandelier, every glass reflecting dim light. Memories came rushing in from the days I was little, thrilled just to be here with him, listening to him chat with the staff, ordering like I was already grown. Each time I thought, one day I'll sit here as an equal. And I had. But no one sat across from me now. And there was nothing left to wait for. The next Monday I returned to the office at exactly 8 a.m. as usual. But not to cling to the seat I had fought to keep, but to begin a completely new chapter. A chapter written by my own hand without permission or oversight from anyone. I walked down the main hallway where old black and white photographs of my father, my grandfather, and past executives lined the walls. I paused briefly in front of the photo of my father shaking hands with a Japanese partner, his eyes stern, his posture firm, an unspoken assertion of patriarchal succession. I moved on quietly. By the end of the month, those walls would change. New faces would take their place. The first meeting I held wasn't with the board of directors, but with the entire senior leadership team. In the largest conference room on the 16th floor, I stood before a group used to the old ways. Safe, hierarchical, and, of course, male-dominated. I looked around and said it plainly without ceremony. Starting today, Mitchell Maritime is changing. Not with slogans, but with action. I laid out the complete overhaul plan. First, all HR policies would be rewritten from scratch. Focused on competence and impact, not tenure or relationships. Second, I formed a new strategic leadership council. 7 members including 4 women, 2 under 35, and none who had ever held executive roles in the company. I didn't choose based on resumes. I chose based on how they challenged me, how they weren't afraid to question the person signing their checks. Third, I eliminated the old 3-tier approval system instituted by my father, where every idea had to pass layers of filters only to disappear into silence. I knew when I said these things some would walk away. Some would resist. But I also knew that if we didn't start by tearing something open, we'd never have space to rebuild. And so, I began building things even the old version of Catherine never dared to dream. I launched an internal program called Dock to Desk, connecting young women from portside communities to education and job opportunities in logistics. They'd receive scholarships, be mentored by women who had fought to earn their place, and most importantly, be seen, be believed in. I remember one of the first girls, Jasmine, 18, living with her grandmother in a workers' housing unit near Savannah's port. During our first meeting, I asked why she chose logistics. She answered quietly, "Because I used to see my mom drive cross-country delivery trucks and no one ever remembered her name. I want to do something my family can be proud of." Jasmine is now interning with our Southern Route Operations team. She's the first in her family to make it to college. I also instructed finance to allocate a portion of our quarterly net profits to create the Women in Motion Fund, to support women launching logistics and warehousing businesses. We didn't just write checks. We offered mentorship, shared office space, and partner connections. At first, some laughed. They called it Catherine's post-victory high. But by month 6, when revenue passed $90 million, they fell silent. By month 9, Mitchell Maritime secured an exclusive contract with one of the top 5 e-commerce firms in the country, a first in company history. And exactly 1 year after I sat back down in the executive chair, revenue hit $120 million. Not just because of new policies, not just because of structural reform, but because people worked with a different feeling. They weren't just employees. They were part of something meaningful. One afternoon, I sat alone in the empty boardroom, late sunlight filtering through frosted glass. Maria walked in and handed me a new financial report. She paused, looked at me, and said softly, "You know what? I don't think I've ever felt this proud to say I work here." I didn't answer right away. Just smiled and flipped through the report. The green numbers stretched across the page like beams of light at the end of a tunnel. I used to think I had to fight to hold on to a seat. But now I understood. The Real win is creating a seat that others want to join, not to compete for, but to build with you. I was no longer living in anyone's shadow. And this company, it wasn't part of the past anymore. It was the present and the future written my way. The letter arrived one afternoon in the middle of the week. Inside a thick cream envelope, no sender name, just a handwritten address I knew by heart. My father's old house on the east side of the city, where he'd lived alone since retiring. I recognized the handwriting at a glance. Neat, slightly tilted, sharp enough to feel cold, just like how he'd lived his life. I let the envelope sit on my desk all afternoon unopened. As if part of me wasn't ready to face his voice, made of ink and paper. I only opened it after the sun had completely slipped behind the high rises, the last light reflecting faintly off the glass floor. Inside was a single sheet, thin and brief. "Catherine, I have nothing left to give you. Because you created it all yourself. I never imagined I'd sit here writing this, but maybe it's the only way I still have the courage to speak clearly. I was wrong. Wrong to think legacy is something passed through blood. Wrong to believe strength belongs only to men. And wrong for not seeing you, even though you were always right there, not behind me but ahead." No apology. No grand regret. But every line carried the weight of admission, a truth it had taken him a lifetime to reach. I folded the letter and placed it in an unlocked drawer. Not to keep it as a keepsake, but because I understood, it was all he had left to give. A late acknowledgement, but a necessary one. A few days later, I received an email from Brandon. The subject line read, "From Colorado." I didn't open it right away. But the preview on the screen was enough. "I know I hurt you. There's nothing I can say to justify it. I just wanted you to know that now, as I rinse glasses after closing the shop each night, I finally understand what it means to start from nothing. The thing you lived through for 10 years. That's where I stopped reading. Not because I was angry, but because I knew, for Brandon, this was the first time he was living without someone else holding him up." I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't forgiven him, but because I understood. Some things don't require an answer. My silence now wasn't a wound. It was a boundary, between the woman I used to be and the woman I had become. That evening I left the office late. A light rain fell, just enough to soften the harbor lights reflecting on the water, but not enough to hide the silence in the air. I stopped at the top floor balcony, looking out at Mitchell Dock 3, the same dock where I once followed my father, checking cargo as a 20-year-old girl. The ships were different now. Bigger, more modern, bearing new names. But the sea remained the same. Still carrying the scent of salt, oil, and journeys that never said goodbye. I stood there for a long time, not thinking anything specific, just letting the memories pass through me like wind across my shoulders. Then I whispered, just loud enough for only me to hear. I don't need them to believe in me anymore. I just need them to never dare repeat that mistake with any other woman. Because I knew, some battles you win not to plant a flag but to erase a boundary. So that one day when another girl stands in a room full of doubtful stares, she won't have to sacrifice half her life just to earn a seat at the table. She won't need someone else's last name to be recognized as an heir. She'll walk in, not asking permission, not hesitating, because she'll know someone stood there before her and didn't back down. And that someone was me. Not because I won everything, but because I never lost myself. I don't know what you would have done if you were in my place. Would you have walked away in silence or stood up, faced it, and changed everything? Maybe everyone has their own way of responding to injustice. But I believe if you've ever been dismissed simply because of your gender, because you didn't fit someone's definition of tradition, then you understand better than anyone why I couldn't walk away. I'm not telling this story to ask for sympathy. I'm telling it because somewhere out there, someone might be getting pushed aside from something they built with their own hands. And if I could do this, then so can you. I would truly love to hear your thoughts. If you've ever found yourself sidelined by your own family or had to fight just to be recognized, in your home, your workplace, or your community, share it below. Sometimes a single comment is enough for someone else to feel like they're not alone. And if this story meant something to you, follow the channel so we can continue walking together through more stories. About family, about choice, and about how we reclaim our voices. Because life always brings us to unexpected turns, and some lessons only appear when you dare to cross your final line.